Okay, welcome everybody. We're live here with Dan Lynch from Cosmology and Osmosis. My name is Galen Moore, content lead at Axelar, and we're going to talk a little bit about building applications in interoperable environments. Dan, if you would just take a minute to introduce yourself and tell the people what you do, that'd be great.
Sure. I'm Dan Lynch. I founder of Cosmology and contributor at Osmosis Labs, and just building a lot of tooling for developers in the interchain ecosystem.
Let us talk about the interchain ecosystem. I mean, if you can, just briefly overview for people who might not be familiar. I know we have a lot of listeners a lot of people in our community who come in from various ecosystems. What is the Cosmos IBC interchain vision of interoperability between blockchains?
Sure. So the way I like to think about it is, we had Bitcoin, some, 12 plus odd years ago, and that was digital money. And then about 6 years later, we had Ethereum come out. That was programmable money. That actually gave us the ability to create smart contracts to do a little bit more interesting things with this, digital money. So then we had programmable money. As we've experienced, all the gas fees and everything, all the congestion from everyone kind of launching tokens as smart contracts on one single chain, we experienced congestion. So, we went from this digital money, programmable money, and then third generation of blockchain now is the interchain, which is sort of a way to scale that congestion so we can have multiple chains. The way I like to think about it is Ethereum is sort of like this congested highway. I don't know if you've ever been to Los Angeles, but like the 405 is like the worst highway ever. There's like tons and tons of cars on it. So that was kind of like Ethereum, where everyone's trading the same gas. IBC is almost like, imagine if we have a ton of different highways. Every chain gets their own highway, but they all have these on and off ramps to one another. So I like to think about, the interchain, the third generation of blockchain as this. You get your own layer one blockchain, but these blockchains can actually communicate with each other. And
So
over.
let me put a pin in that for a second, because is it really only a scalability issue? Because I think at Axelar we like to think about people developing chains that have features built in that are useful for a specific kind of application. For example, you
Yeah, I mean that's true.
protocol
It's
layer
not.
stuff, right?
That's a great point. With Ethereum, if you're launching a smart contract, for example, you're limited to the functionality of Ethereum. In Osmosis, for example, because they're an app chain, they have full access all the way down to being able to control the fees of the network. And that's how they were able to have zero fees to onboard new users and do really interesting things that are just not fundamentally possible on other chains.
Yeah, and I
So
think for a lot of developers that's attractive, right? You sort of, there's things you don't have to do, things you don't have to worry about, and for users, things that are not a security risk, right? They're not being done at the application layer. It just maybe it gives you more of a sense of comfort that your funds are going to be safe.
definitely. And I also see Axelar as like this massive on-ramp to the IBC from the Ethereum world.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
in that highway metaphor, I feel like you guys are like a super highway bridge into IBC, which is why
I love a good infrastructure metaphor. Yeah, I'm a sucker for that. So good. So let's talk a little bit, if we can, just because I feel like there's, and we don't need to get into it, but I feel like there's a lot of people now who are, a lot of projects now, a lot of layer ones that are starting to think in a similar way, right? You see the kind of the vision of Cosmos spreading into other ecosystems that maybe didn't necessarily begin right off the bat with that kind of interoperable multi-highway vision that we were just discussing.
Yep.
What does I guess let's just think on the high level. What does the future look like if you have, multiple chains kind of developing and going in that way? And I guess maybe one thing to start and try to dive into a little bit is kind of what's cutting edge right now on Cosmos. If other chains are kind of building toward the direction of what Cosmos has built to date, what's next in terms of interoperability within IBC? What are people working on that's cool and might be a kind of the next highway that gets built?
Sure. Yeah. Well. First, I just want to pause and state that I feel one of the main features that I see as an open source contributor, I feel like we're experiencing this exponential innovation because every time we build something, like it actually will work for all the other chains in the Cosmos. If I build some feature, most likely it'll work for the other 200 plus chains that are built on the Cosmos SDK. What that means is when I meet somebody that's in the Cosmos, because I've been building companies in Silicon Valley since 2010, and I used to meet people when we were in the same space. It would be this kind of thing where we're like kind of frenemies, like we pretend like we're friends, but we're really competitors. And what I love about the Cosmos is that when you meet somebody, you're actually collaborators and you're actually
Yes,
helping each
right.
other, building on top of the shoulders of giants of your past selves and everyone else. So everything that
Yeah.
you're doing is actually really collaborative.
You don't have
And
to go through some like BD mating dance before you can integrate between your applications or whatever. Yeah.
exactly. And I think that's like one of the coolest things about the IBC is that like every time I meet somebody, it's like, oh, cool, you're working on this, I'm working on that. Like let's collaborate. So just on a high level, I feel like that's going to create this exponential innovation because we're not all building moats and like kind of keeping these private closed sourced code bases to artificially inhibit innovation to extract value. The value is already taken care of on the chain, so we can just build tons of open source for each other. So that to answer your question, though, Osmosis was the go-to-market strategy for IBC. I mean, the Cosmos Hub launched, but when Osmosis came out, it was the first real use case for IBC because you had all these different chains that were launching. Now they could IBC their tokens to provide liquidity in what is now the largest liquidity DEX in all the Cosmos. And I think it's like number 2 or 3 in terms of like token fees. I get the exact. I think it's like for some sort of DEX fee protocol. We're pretty high up there now. But
Sure.
anyway, so Osmosis has basically been the go-to-market for IBC, which is great, and that's opened up a ton of innovation and like cutting edge things that we see in the interchain now. We've got projects like Stargaze. They're building a new protocol for NFTs. It's called ICS 721. And you're going to actually be able to take NFTs from Ethereum and bridge them into the Cosmos. And you're going to be able to IBC NFTs across all these different chains. That actually means you could have NFTs on Osmosis that were minted on Stargaze and
Right,
vice
right.
versa. So there's going to be this interoperability protocol for NFTs now. They don't have to just live on OpenSea.
Yeah.
We also have projects like DAO built on Juno, which are doing really amazing cutting edge governance tooling
Yeah.
for DAOs. For example, you could manage a treasury for a DAO and like they're even doing really cool things and I guess the cat already kind of got out of the bag, but they're even doing DAO ran validators. So they're pushing the boundary of everything you can do with DAOs, and it's all
Yeah.
cross chain so that with interchain accounts, your DAO will be able to actually control your Osmosis or Stargaze um, wallets. So there's a lot of really cutting edge stuff happening between.
DAO governance is a great. I mean, there's a number. I'm here at mainnet, which is actually why I'm wearing this goofy lanyard.
Oh, nice.
Um, I was just talking with there's a number of projects here working on DAO governance stuff, and I was just talking with somebody the other day, and I feel like it's much needed, really interesting, so that DAO organizers can get to the actually very, very difficult problem of how do you actually coordinate the DAO to do anything meaningful, right? You put all the administrative stuff kind of on an even footing, and you can actually try to do something with a DAO, which I think is going to be tremendously exciting when you start to see more DAOs having impact in that way, right? I think we're beginning to see it now, but we're just at the very early days of that governance, and I don't see any reason why that should be walled gardens, right? Why would we do that in a walled garden on a single chain?
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of really interesting, projects that are building on top of the CW3 contract, which is effectively like the DAO, the original DAO contract that came out of, I believe, Confio. But yeah, so like we have chain governance, which is great, but I think that like the next level is this leveraging interchain accounts, which allows you to control one chain on another. So between IBC and ICA, that's interchain accounts, sorry, with all the acronyms, there's going to be so many different things we're going to be able to do. And with Osmosis, Juno, and Stargaze, I kind of think of them as like the holy trinity in the cosmos. I think there's just a ton of exponential innovation happening.
Definitely. You were telling me a story before we got on here about somebody else who might be looking at the same kind of interoperability, weren't you?
Yep. Well, so there's a couple different projects I know that I can't mention that are not Cosmos SDK based, but they are working on integrating with IBC. And the main requirement, if you're technical, is that like you have to have a light client and fast finality. And so there's a lot of cool projects working on that. I was at the Stanford Blockchain Week, and I was with Chango, and we were talking to Vitalik. And Chango was asking him all sorts of amazing technical questions that, like, everyone was trying to talk to him, but like he was really focused on what she had to say and was asking him. And I was kind of chiming in here and there. And at the end, I said to Vitalik, I was like, "Hey, so I hope one day we do an IBC transfer on Ethereum." And Vitalik said, "Me too." So that happened last Tango. I can't say when, but he seemed to be a fan, which was great.
I think it. I mean, whatever the mechanism, I think a lot of people are looking at that vision. I'm sure Vitalik is one of them. And just looking at what Cosmos has done, right, and kind of thinking, what can we do to kind of go in that direction, build something like that. I know at Axelar, we're talking to a number of projects that are in that boat, and want to kind of extend. Basically, as you said, right, Axelar is kind of an on-ramp to this connected chain of highways that is IBC.
Yep.
People are interested in tapping into Cosmos, and that's cool. But people are also interested in, okay, how can I get some of that kind of interoperability between, dApp chains or whatever is being built, on my own ecosystem, and that's pretty exciting to see as well.
And to finish off this point, I think like while there might be other ecosystems trying to do interoperability, what was great about the Cosmos was that they actually built a protocol before they even built any code. So similar to like TCP/IP, that's a protocol that enabled the internet. And so one way that a lot of people think of IBC is it's sort of like the TCP/IP for blockchains. So it's just a fundamental way for blockchains to communicate with each other, just as TCP/IP is a fundamental way for computers to talk to one another. And so I think again, it's just like this awesome approach that I think it was like Penderman and All in Bits took when they decided to build IBC and Jay and Ethan. So it's just phenomenal, and the way that they've done it, I think, enable a lot of stuff.
Let's not get too high on our own supply here. Like, let's talk about some of the challenges that, if you're an application developer building in Cosmos ecosystem, building, IBC interoperable application, is all this just like on a fruit basket at your front door, or
no?
Is this?
No, definitely not. So, it does not come without challenges. I think that there's so many different contributors, and I think there's been a large focus also. As a person who, while I've built Kubernetes clusters and Postgres transpilers, and I'm kind of very technical, I've kind of come into the Cosmos from the front end side of things, and I have to say that the back end was kind of like very much prioritized. There was very little focus, except for Confio's work on front end tooling. So if you were a front end developer, it was kind of like the metaphor that I like to make is, imagine that you're asking Jimi Hendrix to make an album. But instead of just giving him a guitar and a microphone and a recording studio, you're saying, okay, here's a tree, harvest the wood, solder some circuit board, and build yourself a recording studio before you can write your album, right? And so it's like, would we even be experienced? And so that's what it was like for me entering the Cosmos, because luckily I actually have never owned an automatic car. I always drive a manual, and I think as an engineer I'm very much the same way. So it was very much manual. Every single thing you had to kind of, it's like you go on you draw the line to go from like Los Angeles to California, and you think you're just going to take the 5, but instead you end up taking all these little side roads, and before you know it,
you're on the 1.
You almost never get there, right?
Yeah.
So, admittedly, there were a lot of challenges, from documentation, education, examples, boilerplates. Like none of that stuff really existed. And specifically, I found the encoding has been one of the most challenging areas. Um, when you create a transaction, you sign the transaction and you do all the cryptography and you broadcast the transaction to the blockchain or insert information in the blockchain. That was actually very difficult. And part of it had to do with like details around amino and proto encoding. There were some other issues around just getting information about asset lists and information about endpoints, like where do you send the transactions to for which, because there's so many different chains, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was basically like a big unknown. But there is a happy ending to
Which you liked to see, but others are others run, and we want them not to run. We want them to run in the other direction.
So I ended up, like I think I was trying to build. So I reverse engineered osmosis when I kind of originally got into the Cosmos, and I was kind of fighting with amino encoding and everything. And I built the first version of a tool that kind of helped automate some investment strategies. And I showed it to the team. I showed it to the team, and they immediately wanted to work together. So, we did a grant, and I started working with Osmosis. I think it was.
And is this the? Should I pull up the? We got some visuals here. Should I pull that up?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, we can pull up that slide. That's great. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So I ended up like, I think 2 weeks into it, I was like, hey guys, like I built this thing, it works. We could call it, it was, Osmo.js, if you want to call it that. That's actually the library that we published. But I was like, I can't help but, as an engineer, feel like the process in building this thing was a nightmare. So what I did was I decided to take a deep dive. And I don't know how technical I should get, but essentially there's a library that Kepler depends on that does this protobuf encoding. It's like a plugin, and then that was depending on some binary, which was written in like, some compiled language, which then was using another library through standard input and output. So like as a developer, it was a complete nightmare, because if you're trying to just build a front end website with, HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, which, half the world of developers probably knows, it wasn't very simple, because all of a sudden you had to download this binary and do some kind of plug-in magic and just pray that it all works. And it took like 15 seconds to transpile into some, protobuf thing. Anyhow, I'll try to stick to the details. So what I decided to do is go 4 layers deep below what Kepler, the library that Kepler was using for encoding. And I just rewrote the entire stack from the ground up. But what that did was it allowed us to just get rid of these binaries, get rid of all these dependencies, and then make this purpose built for the Cosmos. So as you can see in this graphic, we've got this like cute little gopher. He represents like the Go software and the Go code. And then he's carrying this, box full of these CosmWasm smart contracts. So effectively what we're doing is, the project is now called Telescope. And what it does is it effectively reads the code that was written by developers, and then it goes and generates code. So it's actually what we call metaprogramming, or I guess you can call it like just, transpilers and compilers. But I won't go too much into that because I know the audience is somewhat varied. But the way I think about it is this, if developers are the 1% of the connected world, because we've got about 5 billion people that are on the internet, and only about 18 million of them are developers, per the Stack Overflow surveys. Sure, I mean, that just means that like, and I used to think about programming literacy, and I used to think that like that was the big thing. We needed to get everyone to learn how to code. And I'm like, I've kind of moved on from that. And I'm like, the thing we need to do is we need to write software that reads code from other developers and then generates code so that it's code they do not have to write. This is what metaprogramming is. This is how we can boost developer productivity. This is what Telescope does. And because every app chain is different, every app chain has its own unique functionality. You can't just use Ethers.js or Web3.js. we
Right.
actually have to generate an entire new library for each chain, customized for each chain. And instead of having to sit there and manually write all that boilerplate code, Telescope will just read it and print it for you. It's just like a printer. It's a code printer. And so
And you're saying it could work cross chain in the way you just described. Like I'm building in Ethereum, I could make use of Telescope.
well, we can use it for Axelar, and we can definitely use it for all the IBC assets right now. So currently, it's actually focused on the interchain system, Cosmos. If you want to go to the next slide, what it ends up building is these, or can I actually change? There we go. It creates these multi-chain client packages, right? And the way I like to think about this is it's like IBC for the front end, right? Because the vision of the interchain and IBC is like this interoperability. And while we had this amazing interoperability for the back end, we didn't quite have that for the front end.
Yeah.
And I actually believe that like the front end in many ways is almost, well, I don't know. I think I will just say equally important because the front end is where the users are actually touching the screen, interacting with their keyboards and mice or whatever. But like that's how they're actually interacting with the blockchain. So what I'm trying to do is kind of show show the world like this is important to focus on. Like we need to actually build an entire team and tooling around front end in the Cosmos, maybe eventually in other chains, but to facilitate generating these front end SDK libraries for multiple chains.
I mean, I think this is really exciting. I mean, to see innovation like this in terms of developer tooling, I think people often are thinking about when they're choosing, which environment to build a dApp. If they're thinking about that, they're thinking about, well, what are the fees there like? And, they're thinking about things like, how many users are there and how much liquidity is there.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Axelar, we want to make it so that they don't have to really think about any of those things, right? You can build your logic in the place where the fees are lowest if that's important. You can, you can connect to users on another chain. You can connect to liquidity on another chain via something like what Osmosis is building. But I think what, even perhaps more important than any of those considerations is like, okay, what looks familiar to me? What can I actually work with? What has good documentation and,
right.
and tooling, right? And ultimately, like, yeah, we have, I mean, I think what your point about the front end is spot on. Like people aren't really thinking about it, historic. I think you're just starting to see, really thought being put into that. In a DeFi context, like the only ones who thought about it in the past wave were centralized services, and they reap the benefit of users. But we're now seeing teams like Osmosis again, looking at how can we onboard users simply and easily from any chain, no matter what token they have, right? How can we give them these like one-click experiences, as we like to say at Axelar? And that's not something that is necessarily easy to do, right? Yeah,
definitely not. And one of the other interesting side effects I think of creating this sort of IBC for the front end is that when a developer in the interchain starts to work on another project, they'll understand the code and how to interoperate and work with that chain on the front end level as well, because there's a canonical standard way to work with chains on the front end. Because the issue is right now, we've got all these different libraries written by different developers. And if you ever listen to Rich Hickey talk about software development, I definitely encourage everyone to go watch every one of his YouTube videos. And he talks about simplicity and complexity. And the issue with like all these different chains having all their different JS libraries to interact with their chains, that creates this complex braiding, almost like a braid of complexity when you actually want to do some interoperability, right? So if you've got, chain 1 and 2, and they both have their own APIs on the front end, that means the developer now has to learn 2 different libraries written by 2 different teams. And then what if you want to write a dApp in the Cosmos that works with 10 different chains? Well, guess what? If that was written by 10 different teams, I mean, just have fun having a developer go and try that, right? So Telescope aims to create this interoperability that will also, I think, help people cross-collaborate on all these different chains together.
Awesome. Let's see. Should we go to the next slide here?
Yeah. So, the next great thing I'm excited about, because we focused a lot on the low level encoding, went all the way to the deepest, darkest parts of the ocean of the cosmos in terms of technicality. And now we're kind of coming up to the surface for the front end. Well, I've been building drag and drop website builders for over a decade. I actually just sold a company, brandcast.com, to Time Magazine, or Time USA, about 2 weeks ago. The acquisition happened. So my background is in front end user interfaces. I've been building UI basically as long as I can remember. So while I do all this low level transaction encoding and transpiler stuff, my real passion is in user interface and enabling non-technical people to do what technical people do, or more lately, just catalyzing developers by creating awesome tools for them. So the next really cool project I'm working on is called Create Cosmos App. And there's a couple tools that it actually bundles together. So it's a one command to create a modern Cosmos application. And what it will do is bake in it Cosmos Kit, which is going to be a wallet connector plus UI components to quickly snap together digital building Lego blocks for building Cosmos applications. And of course, everything's going to be using all the amazing IBC for front end technology to help create a high number of very high quality applications in the Cosmos. And for us, it's really exciting because that's something that when I first came in and was trying to build this investment strategies management tool, and I just hit all these roadblocks, to now imagine the developers coming into the Cosmos and having tools like this where the amino encoding will be handled for you, the proto encoding will be handled for you, a canonical API for every front end for every chain will be handled for you, and connecting to Kepler and signing transactions will also be very simple. So now, as a developer, you can just start building your idea. You can literally just start focusing on the thing that you came to go and build, and you're not getting distracted like going on Highway 1 when you really should just take the 5 all the way to San Francisco. So, metaphorically, this is the way to go in the straight line from, idea to the execution of your idea.
Cool. I think that's all we got for slides, and we're about out of time. I haven't seen a bunch of questions. There was some questions about what chain we're going to connect next at Axelar. I would just say stay tuned, and you can always find those announcements, of course, on our Twitter, twitter.com/AxelarCore, in our Discord community. Sign up for our newsletter if you'd like to get it via email. You can do that on our website at axelar.network. And Axelar Scan, also, let me just put in a plug for the greatest block explorer in Web3. I speak from experience. I've used all of them. I was in financial data before this. And Axelar Scan is really just kind of an awesome thing. Dan, where can people get in touch with you, find out more about what you're working on? If they want to learn more about cosmology and osmosis, what are the best places for them to do that?
Yep. So my username is Pyramation, Pyramation, on GitHub or Twitter. So, I'm on Twitter. If you want to check out code, check out GitHub. But yeah, Twitter's probably the best place.
Cool. Awesome. Well, really nice having you on, Dan. It's been a fun conversation, and thank you for taking the time to show us some of the stuff you're working on here.
Hey, thank you as well. And I really appreciate what you guys are doing for the Cosmos. Really excited for that super highway you guys are building for IBC.
Super highway, super on-ramp. Yeah, we'll get there. Good. All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.